Hey, what is happening, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be an amazing day. We finally got in all the parts for the motor build for the Hilux. Now, a lot of you guys were curious and asking questions of what motor we're running. Now, we are running a 22R bottom end with a 20R head. This combination has proven over the years to actually build some really good power. So what the 20R head does on the 22R bottom gives a little compression bump, and the 20R head just flows a lot better. Now, before we get into today's video, I want to talk about the sponsor for this engine. So I sent over the head and pistons and a few other things to 22RE Performance. Jim at 22RE Performance has absolutely been crushing it. He did a ton of custom work on this head. So he did a full port job, intake, exhaust. He did some port work in the bowls, the valve seats. Everything is 100% CNC ported. It is absolutely beautiful looking. Also, he threw in a set of 1 mil oversized 22R valves. Now, 22R valves are bigger than stock 20R valves by I think a few mil, plus they're 1 mil oversized from 22R. So I think those are really the biggest valves you can fit in a 20R head. And those are stainless valves. We did dual valve springs. We got a 500 lift Snyder cam. And with this cam, he was saying that we have to cut valve reliefs in the piston. So he did that as well. Now, if you guys are unfamiliar with 22reperformance.com, let's go through his website real quick. So you can see here, he rebuilds engines. Obviously, that's what he is known for. He's got all this stuff he does to him. He's an amazing engine builder. He's got, let's see, underhood, install parts. He's got just a ton of factory parts. You can see all sorts of sensors, about everything you need to build an engine and more. So that's all factory parts. Then he's got performance parts. So he's got forged pistons, I-beam rods, all this custom billet parts you can see, coil packs, underdrive pulleys, block off plates, builds heads. Obviously, these are the valves that we did in my head right here, these 1 mil oversized stainless. He's just got a ton of stuff, clutch and tranny. I mean, just about everything you need for a truck. So go check out 22RE Performance if you guys need anything for your Toyota. All right, before we get started measuring, let's go over everything we got. So we got a dual row timing kit. We got a ARP rod bolt kit. I just went with OEM head bolts. I don't think we really need the ARPs for that. We got some billet parts here. We got a billet oil cap, the half moons, and then these are really cool. These are, instead of using the original grommets for the valve cover, we got these billet pieces here with these nice countersunk Allens, and that just looks really nice. Also, he sent over the intake and exhaust stud kit, so that's gonna be very nice. We got an OEM oil pump, OEM water pump, and here's the head. We'll check that out in one sec. We got oil pan, obviously, just a stock pan, stock timing cover, and then here's the piston. So you can see the valve reliefs cut here and here. So that's just going to help with the extra lift out of that cam. It's going to help not smack a valve into the piston. So stock rods, like I said, I don't think we really need any I-beam rods for this build. Hastings rings, King bearings for rod and mains. I had the crank ground and polished. That turned out really good. Obviously, we've still got to measure it, but then we had the block bored 1 mil over bore, got a full gasket kit. I just buy the whole gasket kit from Stone, which is actually a really good brand, but I don't like using their head gasket, so I just buy an OEM Toyota head gasket just to make sure that never leaks. I mean, the OEM head gaskets are far superior to really any other gasket I've ever used. Also, another thing he did for my side draft carbs is I bought a new intake manifold, and he completely port matched the intakes to that head. I will have to port match my gasket to the manifold, but he did take a ton of material out of these intakes to get them port matched. All right, let's take a peek at the coolest part of this build. So like I said, this is a 20R head. Here's the exhaust ports. You can see they are ported out, looking really good. He also took and put inserts in all these threaded holes. You know, this head's really old. Over time, those threads kind of get chewed up and aren't as strong as they should be. Here's the intake side. Look at that port work. This looks absolutely freaking gorgeous. And coming up here, you can see the dual valve springs looking good, looking stout. Let's flip this thing over and check out these valves. Look at how big those things are. Like I said, I think that's the biggest valve you can fit in this head. So I am very excited for this thing. This thing should build some really good power, and I've never built, like I said, I've never built a 20R, 22R setup. So I'm very excited for that. Like I said, this is a Schneider 500 lift cam. It's a pretty big cam, but I think with what we're doing to this motor, I think this cam's gonna work really good, especially in the two-wheel drive. Now I'm gonna throw up a few pictures and videos of him doing all this work, all the CNC porting, all the porting on the manifold, everything he did. He sent me a few pictures and videos along the way. All right, the first and most important part of any motor build is measuring all the clearances. So we got to measure oil clearances on the mains, on the rods, and then we got to measure piston to cylinder wall clearance, and then we got to take the rings and set the ring end gap, or at least measure it, make sure it's in spec. So first things first, we are going to start with the crank. So we're going to measure all the oil clearances on the mains and rods. What you got to do is get the, say we're going to work on the rods. We'll take the rod bearings, get them in the rod, and then we're going to take our new hardware. Not that it really matters, but we are just missing a bunch of bolts or nuts on these. We're going to take our new bolts, get them in here, get these torqued down to spec, and then we'll measure the diameter of this big rod end, and we'll measure the diameter of the journal, and then we'll minus that measurement from that measurement, and that'll give us our oil clearance. Same thing goes for the block. We'll take our main bearings, throw them in the block, torque these bolts down to the recommended spec, and then measure that, measure the crank, and we'll get our clearance there. As far as pistons go, what we got to do is you want to measure about a 1/2 inch up the piston on the skirt at a 90 degree from the pin. So pins this way, we want to measure across this way on the bottom of the skirt about a 1/2 inch up. That'll give us our measurement for the piston. And then as far as block goes, you want to measure a few different ways in the block. You want to measure, say, 3 different spots. So we'll measure the top, the metal, and the bottom, and that'll kind of make sure that the cylinder isn't egg shaped, and make sure it's not, there's no taper in that bore. So if you did have a board, I've had it happen before where I get my block back and it's totally egg shaped. So that's why you want to measure, say, 3 different spots this way, 3 different spots up and down, and kind of make sure you record all this. Get some paper out, write down every single measurement, and that way you have it in writing so you don't have to try to remember what was what. So let's get started with the crank. This is, like I said, let's get started with the oil clearances, make sure that is all good to go. All right guys, we got everything ready. So what you want to make sure you do is clean all the oil off of these bearings because they do come oiled. Clean the journal on here on the block, on the cap. Make sure everything is really, really clean. I went through and cleaned it a few times. And then go ahead, torque down all your main caps and clean the crank journals. Make sure those are all clean. Now the tools we're going to be using, you can rig up a bore gauge like this and measure these. But honestly, to get into these middle bearings is kind of a trick. So what I like to use is just one of these little T-handle snap gauges. I think they are. They're very easy to use. They do take a little bit to kind of get used to figure out how to exactly use them, and I'll show you that. And then we got a set of outside micrometers to measure the crank journal. So these are really easy. These ones are digital. Let's take this, let's measure the journal. You just basically stick it around the journal like that, twist that end handle right there, and then until you kind of feel some resistance. You guys know kind of what a feeler gauge feels like when you got some resistance, but it still is able to kind of move smoothly. You don't want it super, super tight. These actually do have a little bit of a click. You can hear that. So you can crank it in, and then when it hits resistance, it clicks right there. So that's when you lock it and then pull it off and then record that measurement. And then how we use these T-handles, this end adjustment right here will lock the actual handle in. So you compress it, you'll twist it, lock it in, and snap it out. So what you got to do is get it in the journal or in the bore just like that, and then you want to kind of wiggle it around, get it centered, and then you want to tilt it up to kind of expand it a little bit. Then you'll take this end adjustment, and you don't want to go super tight because you want that to collapse to the correct spec or the correct measurement. You just want to tighten it enough to where when you pull it out, that it stays in place. So you tighten that, and then you'll basically roll it out. So you want to kind of roll it like that, and then you can use your outside micrometer to measure that distance there. And then you basically just take the block measurement minus the crank measurement, and you get your oil clearance. Alright guys, I got these all measured out. So I remeasured that one, and I did get a 2.0 at the end of her. So this is what we got. Very, very close. I am really impressed with, especially that crank. This one is 0.5 of a thousandths out. So from the rest of them, that's not spec obviously. All right guys, we are good to go. We got these rods all measured out, and they actually have the same oil clearance as the mains do, which was 1 to 2.2 thousandths. So these are all at the higher end, but they're definitely in spec. Next thing, let's measure the piston. So like I said, about a 1/2 inch up the skirt, and then we'll make our measurements on the block. 3 different spots this way and 3 different spots height wise. Well, I figured I'd explain this to you guys so you're not confused what I'm doing. So to set this bore gauge up, you gotta leave your micrometer at the exact dimensions of your piston, and then you'll get the right tip on it so that when you stick it in here, it'll compress. You know, you actually have the range of measurement there with the actual compressing, you know, the actual bore gauge. And then you wanna get that in there, and you wanna zero your gauge. So you can just twist the whole gauge here to zero it out at the biggest spot. So you kind of got to get in there, wiggle it around a little bit, find the highest spot, and then zero that gauge out. So now when we put this in the cylinder block, it's going to automatically show us our clearance. So you can see that's not good. Well, I think we got a problem, boys. We got like 3.5 thou. That one's all the way up at 4. This number 4 back here is over 4 thousandths. So we got something going on. They way overboard this block. Let me double check all my measurements. You can see right there, 2, 3, just over 3 thousandths. This spec should be like, I should be like 1.5 thou, maybe 2 max. That one's just over 3. That one is just about 4. We got major issues. Let me double check all my measurements, remeasure the piston, recalibrate this, and see what's going on. Alright guys, I remeasured the piston, I reset, recalibrated this bore gauge. Let's see what we're at. Yep, we are still over 4 thousandths, like 4 3/10 there. We are 3, oh, no. We are right about 3.5 there. That one about the same, 3.5. That one's closer to 4, 3 8/10 or so. So we got a block we can't use apparently. This thing, obviously, they way overboard it. Another thing you can do is, I'm gonna try this real quick. I got a 2.5. I might use a 3 thousandths feeler gauge. What you can do is, just to make sure everything with your measurements are right, you can run a feeler gauge down there. And if you can fit a 3 thousandths feeler gauge in the bore with the piston, you know this bore is over 3 thousandths. So let's do that and make sure that we are actually measuring this correctly. You know what pisses me off is people that don't pay attention. So I brought this block to this guy, this machine shop, very well-known machine shop. I brought him pistons. I told him no more than 2 thousandths clearance. He said, no problem, we'll hit the mark, we'll do it perfect. And what do you know, we're at 4 thousandths, double of what we should be. So this is the kind of clearance you could probably run with a forged piston, but a cast piston, that is way too loose. It's gonna flop around in there. You'll probably end up breaking a skirt. So I don't know what we're doing. I gotta get a hold of them, figure out what we're doing. Obviously, I can't use this block, so I gotta find another block, and I gotta have it rebored to fit these pistons because, as you guys know, I already had these at the machine shop. A different machine shop Jim actually did these, like I said, did those cuts for the valve reliefs, and I don't want to have to buy new pistons, send those back to Jim, and have Jim recut those. This isn't Jim's fault. This is the other machine shop's fault. So I don't know. I got to figure something out. I'll let you guys know when I figure it out. Well, I just got home from the machine shop. I brought him the block and pistons. He measured them and agreed they were way overboard. So obviously it was the new guy who did it, and he's no longer working there. I really don't know who did it. I don't really care. They said they're going to buy me another block, or at least try to find another block and do it right this time. They should have done it right the first time, right? Either way, they said they're gonna make it right and fix it. So I guess we're sitting around until we get a new block in, because we need the block. Obviously, it's kind of important. You need the block to put anything together. So we gotta find something to do in the meantime, but for now, I'm gonna cut this video here. I wish we could have got something more done. I was hoping to get the whole bottom end together today, but that's not gonna happen. So I'm gonna wrap it up here, guys. I'm gonna go search for a block, see if I can't find one. I'm really hoping they can find one today. They can machine it right, and we can get this thing together. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Go smash that thumbs up button, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.